We welcome you back to the second half of the third and final class of the 16 Evolutes of Maya. And there are various limitations and limiting factors and the imperfections, the malas, all done from a basically tantric platform to give some greater depth and width, breadth to what we're usually studying, basically the Vedanta, and as far as we can in the West, bringing in aspects of true and authentic yoga, eight-limbed yoga, into the whole eternal Dharma, the Sanatana Dharma with its many facets. We want to do that so that we give every one of those great seers of India who mastered a system, that is, composed it, mastered it, probably mastered it first, then composed it, and then began to share it with the world over centuries and millennia. Some of these systems going back at least 5,000 years before the present Christian era, in the case of Ram and Vashishta and Lord Kapila of Sankhya Yoga, very ancient. Some of the darshans of India had actually gotten absorbed into others, like there were 6 rivers and all of a sudden there were 3 and then 2, as they blended into these 2 basic streams of Vedanta and Tantra, or Veda and Tantra if you want to put it that way. And they're all sharing so much. We were saying at the break here, yantra, mantra, tantra, and siddhanta, all these rhyming words in Sanskrit, sharing the great principles of India that have been realized by the seers. That is, they always existed, but beings, as Krishna says in the Gita, over the long efflux of time, religion declined, and then some beings came back and brought the systems back with them and told them, you know, here's an ancient pathway you can follow that's still very valid and is still conducting thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, what to speak of to salvation, but even to liberation, which is it's a much higher and deeper final realization. A real siddhanta to it all is to have non-dual realization. And we're to think that the composers of these systems, even if they have a lot of dualism present in them, you look at them and you really think they had their Advaitic realization. But then, out of compassion for the masses, composed these systems that were based on practice, like yoga, and on tantra, on deification, like the tantra. And so you can imagine then, if you're trying to deify everything, see it all as Brahman, as Vedanta would say. And tantra had its own way of doing that, because both tantra and Vedanta agree on the end result, the end aim of this being formless reality. Then you can see what problems might arise when somebody tried to introduce a system like that, and they would have to say, well, you can go that path, but be careful of that turn and that twist and that rock and that landslide. And pretty much what the Evolutes are to people who wake up, as we say, waking up to spiritual life, waking up out of the dream of finitude or the illusion of being other than your true self. That's coming up here. We mentioned it last week when we mentioned, I don't know, was it here or here, that one of them was there. Oh, there it is at the bottom. Swarupanyata Bhava. I was actually talking about that at satsang yesterday morning. And Swarupa Pratishta, which means Swarupanyata Bhava is an evolute of Maya, means running away from your true nature all the time. There are beings who have gotten adept at doing that. So you might say that there are people who just forget and they can't remember anymore. But there are people who actually are more clever and more far-seeing, and they see their true nature and say, I don't want that. And like, say, Ravana with Ram and Sita, and so how much trouble Ravana caused. But he was causing that trouble so that Ram would kill him in the end, because he knew if an enlightened soul killed him, he'd get enlightened. He'd get enlightenment. And he couldn't get enlightenment any other way. He was too evil. So he is a far-seeing person, a far-seeing soul, who knew that evil was wrong, couldn't get over it, so struck up this plan. I'll just really piss off Ram, if you want to put it that way. And he'll get mad at me and he'll kill me in the end and I'll be free. So you have to know that inside the regions of Maya, there are just everything you could possibly imagine goes on there. And if you're aware of the physical world out here in the Kali Yuga, what we call present times, you see how many aberrations and strange oddities and things are going on out there. Some of them, unfortunately, in the name of religion, but others just outright confusion and evil just for the sake of being evil. So it's that's why we bring up to ascertain what we're up against, and so that we can keep our balance amidst it. It's easy to slip and fall on icy surfaces until you learn to skate. So in that way then you acquaint yourself with these conditions that people are in. And so you have to know that some of them don't know they're in them. So there's no word for what we study in Maya, in Vedanta or Samsara in Buddhism. There's no word for that out there. A nice pat word, you could just say, beware of Maya. Be careful of that, because that's deluding. But we saw a fuller rendering of Maya. It's eternal, it's illusory, it's insentient, it transforms, it's the seed of creation, it causes things to manifest, has no beginning, middle, or end, has evolutes similar to it, and supports karma, but it can be recognized. So all of these things are probably 10 things that even people that use the word Maya don't know about. Well, you talk about Maya, tell me then, what's it about? So that's why in 2000, when I was 50 years old, I put together this paper on the whole thing about Maya, put in as much as I could on it, and that's what I'm sharing with you over the last 3 weeks. And so that, for those reasons, so we can afford ourselves knowledge of the reasons why things are happening out there, if there can be a reason assigned to some of them, because some of them are so senseless, what's going on. War is senseless. But there's not a scripture in any religion in the world that isn't set in war. Quran's set in war, Bible's set in war. Divine Mother's warring all the time in the Mother Scriptures. The Bhagavad Gita's set in war. So, it's a physical problem, and people aren't able to be at peace. That's pratiloma. One of my favorites is pratiloma there. It means you're just not willing to be in harmony with anything. That's asuras. Asuras have come here. Negative beings, devils, demons, demon-like beings. And, with long, craggy nails like winnowing hooks, the songs in India say, these beings, wanting to battle with the Divine Mother of the Universe, whose very nature is harmony and peace and oneness. So this is what you're up against out there. And it might be a little bit of a dry philosophy you have to sit through and hear it with a teacher, if you find a teacher that's even going to share it with you from some of these tantric paths nowadays. But that's why you're doing that, so you can make some sense out of the senseless, at least for yourself. You can recognize it and back off from it, because a lot of the things you're suffering are evolutes of these evolutes. And a lot of them are coming from other people, not from you. You've heard of vibrations? So you're a young child and you make friends with a neighbor and your parents say, we don't want you going there anymore. Later you find out they were very bad people, bad influences on you growing up. And you didn't have the sense or wherewithal not to keep yourself away, and your parents had to step in, you see. So it's called, the opposite of that's called holy company. Unfortunately, your parents didn't send you to that either. It says, oh, there's this dharmic family, you see. They've overcome Eshanatrayam. They don't have the problem anymore of adharmic actions and gaining money by illicit means, and satisfying their desires in the wrong ways. They've all overcome that. I'm going to go see them. No, stay away from them too. So they don't even they don't want you in bad influence, but they don't necessarily want you to be a saint or a seer either, whose parents are pushing them towards that. Except maybe in India and Tibet and a little bit in a few other countries. So the religion and Dharma has to be there. People have to taste it, and they have to then follow it. But as they follow it, I'm saying here in this little introduction to the second half, they have to become aware of what they're up against. They can't just put blinders on and walk through the mind field. Karma Shaya, which is a mine field. If you walk through a field, you're going to get blown up. Well, that's what you're doing when you're moving through this mind field, according to the father of yoga. And those might as well be 16 of them in the first mile of your journey. And you might as well be meeting people who are actually under the influence of them. And if you can't recognize it, you don't know to stay away from unholy company. You might mistake one of them for your friend. This happens a lot to people. Bad relations. You shouldn't have gotten mixed up with that person. But they had a fair face, but they also had a false heart. Fair faces and false hearts. Blackguardism. Vivekananda had all these terms for that when he came here and saw these kinds of people in England and America. And he wasn't getting that great a reception in England, because England was trying to rob India blind of its resources. And here is a Hindu man who was far, far above them in spiritual attainment, realization. So you're going to have to go amongst all sorts of people, materialists and atheists and hedonists and people professing religion who don't really have a religion, and people with fair faces with false hearts who are welcome you in and then stabbing you in the back, like the priests of the Christian religion did here in America to him, and like the Theosophical Society did to him when he was here too. He was the authentic thing here on the scene, and it's going to have to sink in. So this is a person who's aware of these kinds of problems in the world, not just in nature, which some of us become aware of, but in the soul who gave birth to nature. All these souls who as a collective gave birth to all of these worlds. Some of them at a very high level, some of them not so high, some of them at a very base level, like the physical world and the ancestors. Going to heaven, coming back to earth, is not a very high loka in India. It's the 3 lower chakras where eating, drinking, and sex life go on, and birth and death take place as if they're real, and you begin to believe that they're real. The more lifetimes you live in Maya, the more lifetimes a person lives in Maya, the more he or she comes to believe that the world is real. Who said that? Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, whose Mahasamadhi is today. Here on August 16th, Sunday, where we'll be celebrating puja and initiation of a new student into our fold. After 30 years of work that we're going through, we've seen and had to live through people who have come who are wearing some of these coats. And they're of course all around us in the world, but you'd expect in spiritual life they would be filtered out, but that's not what we just heard. Some of them have these appearances and affectations that seem to be authentic and don't turn out to be so. So we were looking at all of these. Let me give them to you in one sentence. Descriptions. Mudavasta, forgetfulness of one's true nature. Mamakara, being trapped by the sense of I, me, and mine. Dehajasa, attachment to the body out of ignorance of the soul. Parasparajasa, mistaking the self or soul for the body, and vice versa, the body for the soul. Vishaya Shakti, the power of Maya that influences the mind by attaching it to the outgoing senses, to the senses. And Bahir Mukhavritti, the desires of the outward going mind that are continually fixating on external stimuli. Ishanatrayam, the triple desire. The drive for attaining spouse, wealth, and offspring in an adharmic way. I was going to sing to you about that problem by one devotee named Kalas, who brings Ishanatrayam actually up in one of the great musical offerings. Namajapane kyun chodiya Ramanam, Japane kyun chodiya Rama. Namajapane kyun chodiya Krodana chora, Judana chora, Krodana chora, Judana chora, Satavachane kyun chodiya Rama. Namajapane kyun chodiya Rama Nam, Japane kyun chodiya Rama. Namajapane kyun chodiya. Kalas sings, "O mind, why have you forgotten the Lord and given up uttering His holy name? When you should be renouncing your anger, deceit, dishonesty, you have given up your integrity and sacrificed your love of truth instead." Very frank talking to his mind, isn't he? And then in the other verse, "You flatter the millionaire, yet forget to praise Sri Ram, though Ram is the owner of the entire universe. Your mind dwells constantly on sense objects and mundane habits, tempted by that which has no existence. Is it for the sake of these fleeting things that you have forsaken the precious gem of Sri Ram's name?" Nama Japani Kyo, so Nama Japa. You see, you recite with your mantra the name of the Lord over and over and again, and it wipes out any possibility of Maya encroaching upon your thinking process. Because, why? Vivekananda said, you are never in Maya. Maya's gotten into you somehow. So slough it off, be done with it. It's not yours, and you don't have to have it. It's not healthy to have it in a picture. So you see he mentions there several of these, even in his talk about wealth, which is part of the Ishanatrayam problem. He also mentions the constantly dwelling on sense objects with the outward moving senses. See, so we had that with the Vishaya Shakti. So you'll see these mentioned not only in scripture, but in song. And as if they're saying, he's talking to himself, but here I'll share this with you, because maybe you have the same problem. Just in case you do, then you can see how I'm dealing with it. And of course, another beautiful instance of one of these bhajans to Sri Ram on Krishna's birthday week here. So we had then, after Ishanatrayam, made our way to Shatavadana. Do you remember what that is? Thinking about 100 things at once. a kind of sign of our times. And maybe you can think of just one thing and do it right, but that thing might have a lowercase t to it. So you're a great surgeon, or you're a great physicist. See, that's concentration. Now we will teach you concentration, yoga says. But what about the thing with a capital T, or that with a capital T, or thou with a capital T, the true I? Can you think about that and get the rest behind me? And how long can I do that? How long can I keep with my mind sharpened by thoughts of reality alone? How long can I keep all of this at bay? Until I've developed a deep samskara in my mind for love of God. Because where is it out there? God's either a dirty word or something that doesn't exist. But Vivekananda said, I want to bring thousands and thousands to the Lord. You only try and give me fame, he said to some of the people. But I want to bring thousands, hundreds and thousands of people back to the Lord. So the Lord may be a cosmic illusion, as every form is. Even Vivekananda said that. It's the highest concept of God the human mind can comprehend is Ishvara. And yes, it's not ultimately real itself. Only formless reality, Brahman, is real. So anytime a form comes, what comes with it? Maya. So you're seeing Maya all the time. It's just that, thankfully, the Tantrists said, well, here at this level, you're seeing Mahamaya. Let's introduce you to her and see how your life goes then. She who can reveal the Maya. What's her revelatory power called? Prakasha Shakti. So, do you want to be the kitten or do you want to be the mouse? She's the cat. You want to look for her, Prakasha Shakti, and then she'll call you her precious son and her precious daughter and bring you into the fold and grant you that one thing that's the most important thing in all your lifetimes just happened to you. And at the same time, auspicious, Sarva Mangala, right? We sang Sarva Mangala. It's auspicious to know what it's not. That is, the true self is and what it's not. There's a whole host of things that you can't even shake a stick at of what it's not. There's only one thing that it is. So it shouldn't be that hard for you to figure out. This self is Brahman. I am Atma Brahma. Say that. I am Atma Brahma. Pragyanam Brahman. This self is pure conscious awareness. Pragyanam Brahman. Tat Tvamasi. I am that. Yeah, Tat Tvamasi. And Aham Brahmasmi. If you want to go straight to the point, I am Brahman. But not the ego I that falls into the control of all of these and more coming. If we can finish them up by the end of the time here, it's just that one is only Brahman. Brahman is Advitaye, Brahmadvitaye. It's one without a second. As Shankara says. Well, let's see, did we finish Shatavadana? We were going to take, I haven't been reading the whole article, sorry about so much reading in this class, which is not characteristic of my classes, but this happens to be something where we're diving into a deep study of it through a paper that's unique in existence. So I'm concentrating on some of the teachings, but more on the quotes from these great souls, Krishna, Ram, Vashishta, Buddha, Sri Ramakrishna. And so let's take one of those by Krishna. He says, the man of uncontrolled mind falls into the error that there is a plurality of objects, and this error leads to his downfall. What mala does that remind you of? Vaicitra, variety of objects. He falls into the delusion that there's a variety of objects out here. So it means basically there's just one consciousness. But all the objects that can come pouring forth from that through the mind's mentation process inside of that one consciousness causes you to forget the one consciousness. The minute you put your mind anywhere, you forgot consciousness. So that might as well be another Maya's evolute. How did Holy Mother deal with that? Well, Mother, I see that they call you the Divine Mother of the Universe, one person said to her. But I see you just down on your hands and knees kneading bread for people's supper tonight. And she rose up. She said, that might be true, my son, but I have the Atman within me, and I keep it in my wearing cloth. And any time I want, I can pull it out and look at it as easily as you could see a fruit in the palm of your hand. Hasta Malaka. And then put it back in when I have to do work. So can you think about Brahman when you do work? Hardly possible. How can you be a good worker when you're thinking about Brahman? See? So you should have times to think about Brahman that work isn't impinging upon. And when you work, you should do it as selfless service of the Lord in mankind. Because mankind is beginning to convince you in your work that there's two here, or many mankind. You see, many. So you're falling right into the hands of Maya again when you think of the many and forget the one. So the non-duality is a very, very subtle thing. Like I said, most enigmatic piece of attainable wisdom that you'll ever come across, and the hardest to hold. Krishna says that then. Sri Ramakrishna puts it this way about Shatavadana, and I think I mentioned it earlier. Everyone is enamored of the rich man's garden, but few ever inquire after the owner. These enchanting powers of Maya are to be recognized and transcended. Back to the article. They inundate our thinking process and thus affect our daily actions and our relations with God. Though a part of experience of life and necessary for its perpetuation, which is one of the dichotomies of Maya, they are responsible for ignorance, delusion, and much of the suffering that human beings undergo. As Sri Ramakrishna so revealingly states, in regard to Maya and its powers, quote, Maya is like the skin of a mango. It protects the fruit while it is ripening. But once the fruit is ready, the skin is discarded. One should not eat it, for it is bitter. And we also know people here in Hawaii have some of the best mangoes in the world. And what to speak of the sin, if you eat too much, the skin, if you eat too much mango, you'll actually start to turn color of a mango. But the skin, of course, is very bitter, and nobody would want to take it. But it's a very nice analogy for Maya. It will protect you as long as you're seeking. As soon as you're ripe, you discard it. So that's the trip from duality to qualified non-duality to non-duality, if you want to put it that way. Or from waking, dreaming, deep sleep to turiya. Or from savikalpa samadhi to nirvikalpa samadhi. Or from sambragata samadhi to asambragata samadhi. Or from meditating on the 24 cosmic tattvas, elements, to kaivalya, separation from nature and form. So in many of the darshanas you get this process read out to you and known in certain terms. At that point, after 8 have been taken up, the paper goes to more evolutes of Maya. So originally I just had 8, but then I looked around and found 8 more. And so researched them and thought about them and put them here. Kartritra Abhinana is a delusion which supposes that the self is the agent of action. So they've taken body, they've taken senses, they've taken ego to a certain extent. Now they're going to focus in on this other problem of agency. We mentioned that back there with Mudavasta and Mamakara, how that word kara is action. So it's my action. So this is a further evolute of Maya which states that when one identifies with the body, it's a case of deha ajasa. as we saw back there. In truth, the real self is not only free of agency, it's free of modifications too. Sri Krishna proclaims this at the Gita. He says, animating my Prakriti, I send forth again and again all this multitude of beings, helpless under the regime of Prakriti. Nor do these acts bind me, for I remain unconcerned and unattached to these acts. So again, all action taking place in Prakriti and not in the self. Those who realize this, they will join Sri Krishna and unite with him in samadhi. Those who don't, they're playing in Prakriti all the time with its various risks. The Atman permeates all things and all beings. By identifying with spirit instead of matter, these beings give up the sense of agency and offer all actions to Lord and Mother of the universe. That's karma yoga at its best. Sri Krishna says again, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you sacrifice and give away, do it as an offering to the Lord. Then you shall be free of bondage, of action and the good and bad results that it yields. Getting excited or happy about good, which just turns the opposite the next day, or getting put off by negative, which is actually a good teaching you should be facing off with. So you're back and forth in that dvandva mohena of good and bad, pleasure and pain. A deluding pair of opposites, they call them. Lord Buddha's advice in this regard, let that one purify the threefold avenues of thought, word, and deed, and be free of the effects of karma. Then that one will tread the path made known by the sages. Adi Shankaracharya says, people in ignorance impute to me these gross and subtle states. In much the same way they impute to eternity cycles of years, months, weeks, and days. Eternity has no parts. Similarly, the self has no activity. It's beautiful. It's Jai Shankara. Visamvada Brahma, as we move to continue on and reach the end of our 16 Evolute study here, is the cloak of mistaken identity. It's the best thing that I've heard it called. The cloak of mistaken identity. Here Maya is up to her old tricks, causing beings to mistake something that exists for something that doesn't, or vice versa. This subtle trick happens many times to people going about their daily lives. It's part of the hypnotism with which living beings fall victim to, and it's all based upon fallacy. Entering into spiritual practice and learning the use of discrimination, an aspirant can dispel what is fallacious from life and mind. Searching for the Atman, the true indivisible self, the seeker must expose all impostors. The scriptures state, and this is Upanishad, in daylight there is the shadow body, at night there is the dream body, near a lake there is the reflection body, and in the mind there is the body of knowledge. There is the body of another. Then there is the 5 sheaths that pose as the real body. But the true self is none of these. Give them all up and uncover your true nature. So we're talking about the Vedantic Adara system, the 5 sheaths and all. Sri Ramakrishna puts it less philosophically and more hands-on. He says, through a story, some thieves came to a vegetable garden at night to steal the crops. A straw figure resembling a man had been put there to frighten them away. The thieves could not persuade themselves to enter the field due to fear of that figure. One of them, however, bolder, approached and found out that the figure was made of straw. He then called to his companions, but they would not go near out of fear. Then the daring thief laid the straw figure on the ground and cried out, "Come here, it is nothing, it is nothing." So all of this action that you're taking responsibility for, and all the karma, good and bad, that comes from it, good, bad, and mixed, we should say, because mixed is the hardest kind of karma to work through, because it confuses you. All of that is nothing. It is nothing. And you should recognize it like that thief recognized that scarecrow. Lay it on the ground and call all others to come and see the truth. Enough said about Visamvada Brahma. That's not Brahma, B-H-R-A-H, that's not Brahma with B-R-A-H, A-H. It's Brahma, which is a kind of delusion. Viparita Bhavana, belief, based on the belief that the world is the only reality. Now they're taking the world to tax. Like materialists who cling to nature, sensualists whose entire existence centers around delights of the senses and the objects, hedonists who seek pleasures without regard for repercussion, worldly beings who desire only to pursue mundane existence. Like an ostrich with its head in the sand, heedless of pressing and persistent dangers, these types believe in the world and have it as their only resort. But whether the world is real or unreal is not the question. The existence of higher worlds and the state of pure non-dual awareness beyond all worlds conveys a bliss and fulfillment far beyond that which the world has to offer. Sri Ramakrishna told stories about this. Quote, a magician came to a king to show his magic. When the magician moved away a little, the king saw a rider on horseback, arrayed in robes and armor, approaching him. The king and the audience began to reason out what was real and what was an illusion. Eventually the horse was not real, nor the robes, nor the armor. At last they found out for certain that the rider alone was real. Based on the story in Vasishtha's Yoga. Maya Magic in King Lavanya's court. I titled that story in my version of Yoga Vasishtha. Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna's wife, it's about time we heard from her. Everything in the world has but a 1 or 2 days existence, yet people are fully preoccupied with it. Lord Buddha says, not in the sky, not in the middle of an ocean, not even in the cave of a mountain should one seek refuge, for there exists no place in the world where one will not be overpowered by death. And what then would that do to your world is the only reality theory? These get, I think as they go along, they get clearer and clearer and more interesting. The rest, who likes the fog and smoke and mirrors of Maya? I don't like it that much. It just has to be seen. These get very much hands-on. Vritti Gyan, the knowledge attained by activity of the mind, which is empirical. The physical universe and that empirical knowledge about it. So Vritti Gyan, you could see that is Vritti, the waves of knowledge. And this happens to be around knowledge that's lower knowledge. So it says here, Maya's illusions, Pundit scholars, professors, intellectuals who are devoid of faith in God and lacking the realization of where the source of the mind's knowledge comes from, are sorely deluded by Vritti Gyan. Seeing the learned men of his day, Sri Ramakrishna said, vultures soar high in the sky, but their gaze is fixed on the carrion pit below. So these beings, their minds are full of facts gleaned from books and precious little of direct spiritual experience. And those then base their pursuits of the world via the senses, of course, which is said earlier in Vishaya. And then we say here, in the words of Sri Ramakrishna, the lens will not burn paper inside a house. come out of the house and the lens will catch the power of the sun. So that's how you get from lower knowledge to higher knowledge. You have to come out of the house of lower knowledge, then you've got the full rays of wisdom, the sun of wisdom upon you. He also says, the fool, seeing the reflection, thinks it to be the real sun. Just so, in mind, intelligence, and other sheaths, the reflection of Atman is ignorance, and the fool thinks it is the real self. That takes us right back here to this chart of the three aspects of the Atman. The Anatman is what he's talking about there, is what Sri Ramakrishna mentions here. Lord Buddha then gives the final capper on this teaching of Vritti Gyan here, of which there's much more, but I'm skipping so that we can get the seer's opinions on these. Lord Buddha says, the fool who knows of his ignorance, indeed, through that very consideration becomes wise. But that conceited person who considers himself learned is in fact called a fool. So Lord Buddha turning the tables on those and bringing out the real truth. If that one who is, Krishna says in the Gita, who's deliberates well and knows the self through discrimination, that person leaves behind his foolishness and becomes an illumined soul. So a lot of that is apropos to this, isn't it? If you have any of these evolutes of Maya working in you, then you should admit it. And then you're wise. You've recognized it. And it begins to disappear from you as soon as you encounter it. It's a very yogic approach that is being used here in Lord Buddha's teachings. Of course, Father of Yoga was very much enamored of Lord Buddha's systems, which were about 500 or 600 years prior to Patanjali's birth. And here's a one that insinuates itself and which is mentioned a lot by Holy Mother. It's called doshadristi. The tendency of human beings to find fault with others. It's an insidious tendency of the mind, and it proceeds from the unripe ego that is insecure one moment, puffed up with pride the next. We call that the two poles of the ego, correct? This wavering condition is reflective of spiritual immaturity. Christ said, "Seek thee first to remove the beam from thine own eye before attempting to remove the mote of dust from another's." Very great teaching of Jesus. Holy Mother Sri Sharda again explained it thus: do not find fault with others, learn to see your own faults. The whole world is really your own. No one here is a stranger. Lord Buddha follows that up in a unique way. The faults of others are easily seen, but one's own faults are perceived with difficulty. One winnows the faults of others like chaff, but conceals his own faults as a fowler covers his body with leaves and twigs to catch birds. You can see the great manana going on in the seers. How am I going to explain this evolute of Maya to these people of this particular age so that they will understand and beware and be careful? Lord Buddha also said about this dosha drishti, finding fault, those who imagine error where there is none and do not see it when it does exist, such beings, embracing false views, enter into the woeful path. Dosha drishti could be put here because there's a cosmic side to it. It's called defective vision. Lord Buddha says, the world is blind. Few see things few see things as they really are. As birds escape from the net, very few gain right perspective. So this dosha drishti, what more than just one-on-one, finding fault with that person or this person and that, it also has this is of a cosmic design too. Look at it from a collective viewpoint. Sri Ramakrishna indicates it by saying, once some ruffians were causing a disturbance on a landlord's estate. The landlord hired some other ruffians to go and put an end to it. So darkness only reveals the glory of the light, is kind of what he's saying there. And certain beings who are familiar with darkness have to go to do away with darkness. Sri Ramakrishna also says about it, a monk was once beaten unconscious in the streets by a wicked man. When he regained consciousness at the monastery, one of the monks asked him where he was in order to ascertain his mental competency. He answered, "He who was beating me is now inquiring after my well-being." So not finding fault with even the person that beat him, sort of like to turn the other cheek, but being beaten unconscious by a man, waking up and seeing the same divine being in the person who beat him as who was waking him up and inquiring for his welfare. So that's a cosmic side of the opposite of dosha drishti, you might say. And we just have 3 more here. We're going to make it, I think. This one, of course, is a favorite of some of us because it's been noticed as SRV grew up teaching Dharma to Westerners. It's called Tarkikabudi. The intellect that always argues. It's very easy to define. Sometimes people's questions are like that. They're not wanting to hear the answer. They'll sit through the answer, but their question never gets satisfied. You might have seen this happen in all circles, but particularly in spiritual inquiry, Atma Vichara and so forth. Some people just are all into the question, and then you speak to them the answer, and then they'll repeat the question to you again. It's very odd. They didn't hear your answer. So they're very oriented just to one side of the process. And that's a problem in the intellect, Tarkikabudi. A defect of the mind. Sri Ramakrishna says, everyone thinks that their own watch keeps the only correct time, to indicate such problems. Lord Buddha says, one is not a supporter of the law merely because he talks much, but that one who hears only a little of the divine law, yet perceives its essence by diligent exertion, and does not neglect it, is indeed a true supporter of the divine law. Shankara says, give up this unreal notion, what you have taken as your own self. Take instead that which is real, which is self-evident, beyond argumentation. It is, I am Brahman. By this pure thought, know thine own self, which is indivisible consciousness. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna puts it simpler. He says, those who carp and cavil about this, my supreme truth, will never be able to comprehend it. Sri Ramakrishna says, only one thing has never been defiled by the tongue of man, that is Brahman itself. There are defects in every religion, but it is God who maintains them there, and it is God who removes them in time. A man set out to visit Jagannath Temple. Instead of going south, he goes north. Searching for the location, he asks someone where it is and is told to go south. Eventually, he reaches Jagannath, attends the temple, communes with the Lord of the universe. So, this is why you need to get this direction from an illumined soul, to get yourself over this problem of argumentative intellect. thinking your watch keeps the only right time, for instance. In the Uddhava Gita, Sri Krishna speaks on the subject. Quote, "It is not as you put it, it is as I have put it. This sort of fighting over the issue is due to Maya's power of the gunas, which are difficult to get rid of. It is this disturbance that causes the doubt, which is the ground of contention among disputants. This doubt vanishes when one attains calmness of mind and self-control, and after that, all dispute comes to an end. And you get this peaceful mind." Now, I mentioned here that the penultimate one was one of my favorites. Pratiloma is another evolute of Maya. Inadvertence to following the way of harmony and unity. You'd think people would want this. They'd want what was good for themselves and for others, but for some reason they don't know it's good, I guess. It's caused by a distortion in the mind which neglects and rejects higher intelligence and accepts the ego's divisive tendencies instead. Lord Buddha observes, "Long is the night to a sleepless person. Long is the distance of a league to a tired person. Long is the circle of reverse to the fool who does not know the truth." So, all examples of beings who are going against their own highest good, not willing to fall into harmonious ways beyond Maya. Lord Buddha also says, "So long as evil deeds do not mature, the fool thinks his deeds to be sweet as honey. But when the evil deeds mature, they bring untold misery." Sri Ramakrishna teaches about this imposition. We're talking about pratiloma. "Wisdom and liberation cannot be had as long as egotism persists. Birth and death also do not come to an end for that one who is given to egoism." Like the averse nature of following, getting into harmony with like Guru, Dharma, and Sangha. It's a distortion in the mind. Sri Krishna says, "That which, enveloped in darkness, regards unrighteousness opposed to the natural way of Dharma as a desirable thing, and views all things in a perverted way, that intellect is tamasic." That really goes straight to the point of pratiloma. Finally, Sri Sharda Devi says, speaking about individual states, "The intelligence of a human being is very subtle. It is like a screw that, if turned slightly in the wrong direction, misthreads." So you were going along a path, everything was fine, all of a sudden because of a misdirection of your mind or a distortion there, you went a different direction. And she concludes, "Such a mind experiences mental imbalance." And of course, all of this is falling under the overall category of mental imbalance. Which brings us in good time to Sarupanyata Bhava, the final of these 16 evolutes. Thank you for staying with it, and you've got the definitions there in your notes, and something you can keep on hand and do your manana, or contemplation, about. Sarupanyata Bhava is just a state of being other than what you truly are. It's like your true nature has been explained to you by the seers, but you somehow still maintain your position as being other than that. There's a kind of stubbornness in the mind. Instead of abiding in your essence, which has been defined for you, then that being finds many ways of denying or hiding from it. It reveals a lack of spiritual maturity and the presence of inherent weakness. One must be bold and stand up to declare the immortality of the self and the illusion of death. Sri Ramakrishna says, "In front of God's mansion lies a huge stump, One cannot get into the mansion without jumping over this stump. So that's a big impediment to people being other than their true self and insisting upon it. He also said, according to local legend, a snake has a precious jewel lodged in its head, yet it is content to eat a mere frog. Remember some of these stories from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which everyone should read if they haven't already, or reread it if they've been a few years since they have read it. That's one of those sayings that comes up. So you've got this precious Atman inside of you, and you should be living in perfect harmony with it, pratiloma, and you shouldn't be running away from it, swarupanyata bhava. Instead, you're content to eat a mere frog. You're what a petty potentate you have become, like that song we quoted before, with all these great things at your beck and call, and you can't just get into harmony and eventually into unity or samadhi via that path. Here's a nice way. We hear from Swami Vivekananda. He says, the self is all in all and none else exists, and thou art that. So how about that for a way to give up thinking yourself other than your true self? Lord Buddha says about it, few beings ever cross over to the farther shore. The multitudes who remain futilely run to and fro on this self-same shore. And Sri Krishna says, and that will end it, a person who denies the Atman is tormented by attachment to the body and its desires and activities. But the man whose mind rests in the Atman does not even know the body as it stands, sits, walks, lies down, eats food, or performs any other natural act. Nice to have that put right after Swami Vivekananda's statement, because that's how Swami Vivekananda was when we saw him here, in India and in the West, both. He just was totally unaware of his body. He was all Atman. So such is the predicament of the condition, Mayic condition, called Swarupanyata Bhava. The opposite of it, which would not be an evolute of Maya, would be the proof of truth, is Swarupa Pratishta. The Pratishta means you're steady, unmoving. So you'll be steady in the fact that yourself is the true self, the Atman, all abiding. So there we have reached the end of this downward spiraling process that people take many times. You might say the dynamics of the wheel of the Kala Chakra, what happens to people when they fall into samsara. And what are the influences, at least as the Tantricists, the Shaivites mainly, look at it, the process, and how it's easy to, by keeping Vidya Shakti as your companion, may she, the primal guide, my refuge be, keep her, Mother Wisdom, put her on like a raiment, it says in Judaism, that son of wisdom, put her on and keep her with you all the time like you would put on warm clothes. And then never fall below this line. See, you can be born in the birth of jivas, but you've known the Maya's characteristics, you've been told by your teacher what the 7 malas are, and then maybe somebody even ventured forth to think about it and to teach it in one of the darshanas, what people suffer when they fall under the auspice or the influence of the 16 evolutes of Maya. So again, my gratitude to all of you for staying constant and present with this. And you can look back on it if you have the verve to do so later on. But we have given you one-line descriptions of all 16 of them and some other information about each so that you can, as I was saying, most of us aren't worrying about much of this. It's something that we're pretty much living our lives in the Dharma and not falling into these. But the mind, of course, has tendencies of falling at times when the gunas are in a low cycle, for instance, as was mentioned here. So it's good to have the knowledge of it and the wherewithal to resist it. But I'm adding it in here as a facet to the third class, final class of this series, so that you can see it operating in people. The world is just the world. Nature has its changes. Even those who follow Aparavidya are aware of those. The lower knowledge can tell you about how things compose, decompose, what the chemicals are, and all that knowledge. But this tells you more about the decomposition of the intelligence of a human being. And that's not a good thing at all, because then it'll create a world based upon that very failure, or these sets of failures. And that's why people are suffering. There are 4 noble truths about it. You can look at it through the Buddhist system. You can see Lord Buddha had a lot of quotes in this paper I wrote, because he was one of those that put his great mind on the problem of human suffering. But I wouldn't think that you would be able to be very effective in helping people out of suffering if you didn't have some working knowledge of Maya and its evolutes. So here, let's end with a chant and move on here in our SRV Loka to a puja for Sri Krishna and Sri Ramakrishna tonight, and a prasad meal. And so here we will end with our chant and think about all of you as we undergo this beautiful austerity tonight. Om Bhadram Karnebihi Sriniyama Devaha Bhadram Pashyema Akshabir Yajatraha Stirairangaish Tushyavam Sastanuvir Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu Swasti Na Indra Vridashravaha Swasti na Pusha Vishwadevaha Swasti nastarksho arishtanemihi Swasti no brihaspatir dadatu Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual. May we hear with these ears what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother of the universe, with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.